A heated showdown on Capitol Hill. Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon directly confronted Attorney General Pam Bondi over what she says could be a secret list of Americans labeled as domestic terrorists. At the center of the clash, a Trump-era directive ordering the Justice Department to identify groups tied to so-called radical left terrorism. But here's the question that set off fireworks. Is the government targeting criminal acts or political beliefs? And does Congress have the right to see the list? Let's break down what happened and why this fight could have major implications for civil liberties in the United States.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Actually, I think the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi, I'm here. On September 25th, President Trump signed a memorandum known as NSPM 7, purporting to address domestic terrorism. But Americans across the political spectrum were immediately alarmed by the memo's blurring of the line between unlawful conduct and constitutionally protected speech and activity, as well as its call to investigate, prosecute, and dismantle groups that the president and Stephen Miller described without evidence as, quote, an organized campaign of radical left terrorism. Now, counterterrorism experts were further alarmed by the administration's singular focus on left-wing extremism, combined with the sudden deletion from the DOJ website of decades of research and law enforcement analysis, which had concluded that right-wing extremism poses the greatest terrorism threat to Americans. The president's memo broadly and vaguely links violent conduct to ideologies, and it targeted specifically anti-American, anti-Christian, and anti-capitalist beliefs, as well as, quote, hostility to so-called traditional American views on family, religion, and morality, end quote. President Trump has repeatedly and openly, however falsely, tried to brand his political opponents with these sentiments listed in his memo. But as you know, as a lawyer, holding beliefs that the White House disagrees with is not a crime. And the statute defining domestic terrorism requires criminal acts, not just thoughts and ideas. That's why legal experts, nonprofit leaders, religious freedom, and civil rights advocates immediately raised the alarm that the new presidential directive was a politically motivated attack on civil society designed to silence those who disagree with the administration. So, Ms. Bondi, Section 3 of that memo directed you, as Attorney General, to submit to the President and Stephen Miller a list of groups or entities whose members are engaged in acts that meet the definition of domestic terrorism. And then on December 4th, you directed the FBI to work with a variety of law enforcement entities to compile a list of groups and entities engaged in such acts by January 3rd, 2026, and to update that report every 30 days thereafter. So can we assume that you or persons under your direction at the Department of Justice have prepared that list of groups or entities who are designated as domestic terrorist organizations? And I just remind you that's a yes or no question. Did you prepare the list?
I'm not going to answer it yes or no, but what I will say is I know Antifa is part of that. I will talk to you about that.
I'm reclaiming my time. I asked you whether you
an Antifa member was arrested in Minneapolis federal court for
my time.
stalking.
Did you
they
have
ask a question
list?
and don't want an answer.
The answer is yes or no.
Time belongs to the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Gentlelady can proceed.
Okay. So will you commit to providing this committee with any list of organizations that you have recommended be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
We will comply with the law in all matters.
Will you commit to provide this committee with your list of entities that you recommend be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
I'm not going to commit to anything to you because you won't let me answer questions.
Okay, well then we do understand that your current position is that you have a secret list of people or groups that you are accusing of domestic terrorism, but you won't share it with Congress. And I'd remind you that when the U.S. government designates an entity as a foreign terrorist organization, it must report that to Congress and to the entity, because the government can make a mistake and the entity has the opportunity to contest it. So your position seems to be that if you falsely designate an American or an American organization as a terrorist group, there's nothing they can do about it. I think we get it. You don't want to answer the question.
No, you don't get anything regarding public safety.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Thank you for the insult. It's clear you didn't come to Congress prepared to answer questions that the American people have every right to have answered. But if you were to prepared to answer truthfully, here's what we expect the facts to show. The administration is keeping lists of Americans who the White House says are engaged in domestic terrorism. Those lists could include Americans who have not committed any acts of terrorism, but simply disagree with this administration, people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And your list may include clergy, elected officials, and members of indivisible groups across the country. And those lists likely don't include Proud Boys or Oath Keepers who were actually convicted. Americans have never tolerated political demagogues who use the government to punish people on an enemies list. It brought down McCarthy, it brought down Nixon, and it will bring down this administration as well.
And you're right. That's why we're so glad they rescinded the memorandum targeting parents. For goodness sake, as the gentleman from California just pointed out in his 5 minutes.
Her concern is the administration targeting violent conduct or political ideology. During the exchange, Scanlon asked a direct yes or no question. Has the Department of Justice compiled a list of organizations recommended for designation as domestic terrorist groups? Bondi responded that such work had been done referencing Antifa, but declined to commit to sharing any list with Congress. That's when the confrontation escalated. Scanlon argued that when the U.S. designates foreign terrorist organizations, there are transparency requirements and legal processes that allow entities to contest that designation. But in this case, she suggested Americans could potentially be labeled without oversight or recourse. Scanlon also warned that vague definitions, targeting beliefs described as anti-American or hostile to traditional values, could open the door to investigations based on political disagreement rather than criminal behavior. Bondi pushed back, saying the department would comply with the law, but refused to make specific commitments during the hearing. This exchange highlights a deeper constitutional debate. Where is the line between national security enforcement and First Amendment protections? Who decides which groups qualify as domestic threats? And what oversight mechanisms exist to prevent abuse? For many civil liberties advocates, transparency is the key issue. For supporters of the administration, aggressive enforcement is framed as necessary for public safety. The question now, will Congress demand disclosure of any such list, or does the executive branch have broad discretion here? Drop your thoughts below. And subscribe to Capital Blue for fact-based political analysis from a pro-democracy perspective. Give me an intro. Here's a strong, high-retention intro hook. You can drop at the top of the video, Tonite on Capital Blue, a heated showdown on Capitol Hill. Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon directly confronted Attorney General Pam Bondi over what she says could be a secret list of Americans labeled as domestic terrorists. At the center of the clash, a Trump-era directive ordering the Justice Department to identify groups tied to so-called radical left terrorism. But here's the question that set off fireworks. Is the government targeting criminal acts or political beliefs? And does Congress have the right to see the list? Let's break down what happened and why this fight could have major implications for civil liberties in the United States.